But I think creativity is something we're all born with, and I think that's something we forget. We get older and we go through the institutions, whether it's trying to think of the English word is elementary school or gymnasium, later on. I think at some point you go to school and you go to school, initially you go to school to learn, but at some point with our, the way we institutionalize learning, you go to school to get good grades. And I think that really defines how we, what defines bravery. Because in the end, if you're just worried about the grades for the most part, then you take less chance and less risk.
My experience with education is it really depends on your teacher. Sure. I was at a university which really fostered creativity, which really fostered analytical, rigid thinking and problem solving. And I went to Cambridge, I did my undergraduate in philosophy before I entered the art world. And in analytical philosophy, what you're taught to do is look at texts extremely stringently, but then try and formulate your own arguments. So basically you're up against Kant in some cases, which is quite scary, because Kant is only one of the most important philosophers in Western Europe. Yeah. But then they tell you as a second-year undergraduate, what is wrong with with one of his moral imperatives, and you sit there going, oh dear. And so then you have to have this bravery to believe in yourself that you can have this argument with Kant, because not everything about Kant is actually right, as it turns out. Anyway, but that is an example where my university and my teachers at the university certainly put me in a position to have enough confidence to approach these incredibly complex problems and then evolve my own kind of thought process to face off with these. So I think that's where kind of my bravery comes from as well, like really from my teachers.
Yeah. I would rephrase that, how important is creativity today? Mm-hmm. And then you have to define what is creativity, and we all have different answers. But in the end, I think in the age where machines are going to take a lot of what we know or the data and make choices for us, even if we don't know it, I think creativity is even more important.
No, I mean, I think this point about the third industrial revolution that's now upon us and us moving from a very mechanized society with a lot of repetitive tasks that were carried out to these tasks being increasingly taken over by machines and by robots does mean that it falls back on the laborer now to really be a brain laborer, to, use their knowledge rather than their hands. And so, of course, this brings up the notion of creativity, because if you want to really be successful in this kind of new labor economy, you need to be above your peers. And how do you stand out? By having better ideas than them. And I think so there's also kind of an economic component to this argument as well. And it almost feels like creativity is a holy grail. Whereas before we treated artists and poets and authors and so on and so forth a bit like madmen, they're now kind of seen as the gurus of our society. And I think that change in their status and their social status is really interesting over the past 100 years.
I think creativity and being brave means going beyond yourself, questioning yourself.
Questioning your beliefs all the time, otherwise it's not creative.
Yeah, exactly.
If you just go ahead with your beliefs or with the status quo and what you've been doing all your life, you're not going to produce anything particularly interesting. You're just going to do more of the same.
Yeah, and I think that's key. That's something I talk about when I work with clients and I give presentation. It's really questioning the status quo, because it's so easy just to get in Europe or in Germany specifically, where you pay a lot of taxes. Life can be very comfortable, right? And you don't really have to do anything different. So you really have to make an effort to do something different. And for me, that's also creative. It boils down to a few things. Number one is, creativity. It's questioning the status quo, which is hard. It's a bias towards action. So if you have an idea, actually putting that idea into motion. And then the other component is critical thinking. And I think that's something that we have to teach ourselves and teach our kids, of course. What is critical thinking? And reteach, and these things over and over again. So biases, what is a bias and why do I have this bias? Unconscious bias and the conscious bias.
But one thing that I've been observing recently amongst younger university students and sort of the younger Berlin artistic community as well was this unwillingness to engage with different perspectives. I mean, this kind
just
of
picking one side, or
picking one side and picking this more kind of identitarian approach. I am this, therefore I don't want to be confronted with this. The trigger warnings everywhere.
And that's actually the fourth thing I would mention is diversity. Not just diversity within the people you work with, but diversity of thought and diversity of influence. If you look at a lot of, we'll pick on Germany since I reside there, but if you look at the exec level, most of them seem the same. It's quite homogenous. If that's the case, that's okay to some degree, but if you can't change that, then at least you have to have this diversity of influence. So who you actually hang out with and who you actually read or newspapers or whatever. I think that's super important as well.